Coming up on the Men at the Movies podcast, we have a special treat for you today as we discuss Stand By Me. The main theme was the closing line. I never had any friends like I had when I was 12. Does anyone? This movie is rich with the themes of friendship, the loss of innocence, and discovering our true identity. Don't be led by comfort and fear, but join us as we discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being.
Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining me from not quite across the world, thankfully, but from Denver, Colorado, is Dave Small. Hey, Dave, how you doing today, man?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah. I'm excited. We've been trying, I think, to get this for a few months now, to get together, to meet up. And I did the intro. Yeah, you're in Colorado right now, but we're going to talk about this here in a couple minutes, because typically you are not in the U.S. You're not in the continental U.S. or even the extended 48.
Yeah. Typically I'm overseas, working in Burma in the jungle. And, with the invention of Starlink, I now do have capabilities and connection a lot, but it's sometimes not that reliable.
Right. Definitely not something we want to be wasting or using the resources there to send out to try to record a podcast from the jungles of Burma. As interesting as that would be contextually, I think that there are better uses of that of those resources on that side of the world. So yeah, I'm excited. Dave and I share a community in a Slack channel for guys who have been through the Become Good Soil intensive. And several months ago, if I remember correctly, you put a pitch out there, you put a request, because you and I at this point had never interacted that we were aware of, saying, hey, is any podcast I could come on? And so what prompted that self-invitation?
Yeah, it's speaking of self-invitation. Sorry, my mother always taught me that it's rude to invite yourself over to someone's house, and my experience has been the opposite of that. That sometimes people are just busy and don't know that they're missing out on a good thing, and so if you just invite yourself over, then they're like, "Oh yeah, of course I want you to come over." But in this situation, if I'm honest, I was thinking about doing some fundraising for the Jungle Discipleship School that I run in Burma. And somebody said that getting on podcasts is a good way to tell the story and to, introduce people to you and your message. And I thought, oh, okay. But then I thought, well, I don't know any podcasts. And and so then I went to the Slack group, because this is a group of guys that are kind of like-hearted and like-minded. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, this would be a good group that they might be able to point me in that direction. And and so then it got us connected and probably 4 or 5, maybe 4 months ago when that whole process started.
Yeah, it's been a little bit. And it's interesting you bring that idea of the self-invitation up, because in our recent trip to Uganda, now my brother's been going since 2011, my wife and I since 2015. And, so we've been a few times. Even this time I got labeled Mzungu Muganda, which means Mzungu is their word for white person. But it basically is like, oh, you're like a white Ugandan now. Because I've been going, the friendships, the relationships, I move much slower than most of my American counterparts, because you have to embrace Africa time. But one of the things that we found out is that they want you to invite yourself over. Like, yeah, there was a not a conflict, but a relationship that my brother has with somebody over there. And they were sort of, he hadn't seen her in a few years. And this was somebody who'd been very integral to the ministry. And when they finally got connected, he realized as an American, he was wanting her to invite him to sort of welcome, say, hey, we're good, to reach out. She was waiting for him to sort of say, hey, I want to come see you. But that idea, like, to invite yourself over in their culture is actually expected in a way that you honor the person, because you're like, no, I want to come see you. So I'm going to invite myself over. So we did that like with 3 or 4 people. It's like, hey, next time we're here, I want to come to your house. And they like, oh my gosh, I would love that. They don't do it in that way, how Ugandans talk. But so it was interesting that even that whole concept, as you were talking about the self-invitation, is like, oh, that's actually a very powerful thing that I think for personally, like you said, we look at it as I am going to put them out or inconvenience them. But that idea like, oh, no, actually what you're communicating is I really want to spend time with you.
Well, and I just think, I mean, we haven't kind of got to the teed up the movie yet, but I think it's applicable almost to what the theme of this movie, at least one of the themes about the movie that I find is like about friendship. And, you know, we all live these lives that are so busy, you know, people have kids and jobs and relationships and walk the dog. And by the time you get home from work, you're just smoked. And you don't want to inconvenience your friends, but sometimes you just need to invite yourself over. Like, hey man, I'm coming over. I've got a 6-pack and I'm showing up. And okay. I think it's something we have to do as men these days, is invite ourselves over to our friend's house.
Yeah. And I've used the example a few times on here. Like I saw this TikTok or Instagram video about men relationships in the 2000s. And this guy basically made up a podcast so that he would have people over to talk. And he was like, we've been talking for 2 hours, but I don't have a podcast. The mics aren't even connected to anything. And I kind of feel that way sometimes. It's like, oh man, I haven't talked to this dude forever. I should have him on the podcast, or just maybe call him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you wanted to talk to, because you put out that sort of the self-invitation as I called it. And then I said, all right, I do this podcast on movies. So if you bring up a movie, then we can sort of weave in the other stuff that you want to talk about. Not like, as we even talked before, is like, I have no worries that you're going to be like Cars salesman guy or anything like that. We're going to talk about this movie, why it matters. And God's going to show us how to reveal to us his deeper design in our conversation as we go. So when you look at Stand By Me, came out in 86, you know, it's got great set of actors on there. And I have to once again reveal my lack of 80s movies. This is the first time I've sat through the entire movie. When I sort of opened the menu, I said, all right, pick a movie and we'll find a time. Why did you pick this movie? And why do you love it?
Yeah, good question. I don't know if it was, so I'm originally from Canada, and I don't know if it was the same. I imagine it was the same in America, but when I was a kid, I remember there was these kind of movie, I don't remember the name, but like a movie program. And it was like, you get your first 10 movies or 8 movies for a penny each. And then you have to commit to buying, you know, X number of movies over the next year at full price. And I remember like saying, Mom, can I sign up for this program? And so I signed up and I picked these movies, and you have like an actual form that you're checking boxes on. There's no computer stuff. And yeah. And anyways, so I remember picking these movies, and they show up in the mail, and they were like VHS tapes. And, you know, I'm sure you may have some listeners that are like, wait, what's a VHS tape? But I remember watching this movie, Stand By Me. And for me, movies, as a kid were an important part of my early teenage years, and kind of these years where I wanted some independence and wanted to like branch out from underneath my mom and dad's authority and their way of doing things. And the movies were this place where I could kind of escape to and say, oh, I'm getting a way to express myself, or a way to understand or put words around kind of what I'm feeling or what I'm going through. And I remember Stand By Me from years ago, and I don't know really why it came back when you asked to pick a movie, and because there's so many classic, amazing movies to talk about, and I prayed about it for a while, and I just thought, okay, let's talk about Stand By Me. It's a great classic, and it was a movie that helped frame my teenage years and help put words around some of the feelings. And it's not a action movie. They're going to find a dead body, but it's actually a fairly slow paced movie. But for me as a kid, when I first watched it, I just remember the way that they interacted and the friendships that these four boys had as they go on this adventure to find this dead body. It spoke to something in my heart, and it kind of opened up something where it's like, yeah, friendships are important to me. And I feel like each of these characters have such a different personality and a different story, and yet they all work together so well. And there was also part of it is like, oh, which one of these guys am I? But anyways, so that's how I kind of settled on Stand By Me.
So which one of them were you then?
I think there's a part of me that is in each of them. Mm-hmm. But I kind of resonate with Chris the most. And Chris, is kind of the rough and tough guy. And the story is told by Gordy, like adult version of Gordy is telling the story. And it seems at first glance that the story is about Gordy, but in my mind, the story is really about Chris. And he was kind of the rough around the edges one, and I was always a little rough around the edges. Not quite in the same way that Chris was, but just I could resonate with how he felt.
Mm. Yeah, and that connects, because one of the clips that you requested was him sharing his story with Gordy later, sort of in the middle of one of those emotional moments where they're connecting and they're sharing some truth about each other, and mm-hmm. the whole movie, and I think our whole conversation is wrapped up by the closing scene, where, as you mentioned, old Gordy, played by Richard Dreyfuss, he's a writer, as has been shared the whole time, and to close his story, because basically the movie is his story that he's writing. He said, I never had any friends later on like the ones I had when I was 12. Does anyone? Mm. And that's I think when you're looking at, right now in America and Western civilization, they're actually talking about the loneliness epidemic in men. And, you see parodies of it on Saturday Night Live, and we just sort of talked about it with the self-invitation or the conversation and all this stuff. But that idea of friends like you had when you were 12, and you were sharing some of your story, and when you were 15, these guys, this is a group of guys that are in a transitional moment of their lives, and they go out on their own for 2 days, and they go to see something that sort of grows them up. They see a dead body, they go out and they come back and they're changed. And you were sharing sort of how you got to Burma back when you were a teenager. And after your story, I was like, man, that actually sounds really similar to sort of the theme of this movie. And so I'd love for you to share because you said you grew up in Canada, but how was it that you ended up in Burma? Because I thought the parallel was just really, really interesting.
My parents were both school teachers, and back in the late 90s, they wanted a family adventure. And so they took a leave of absence from their teaching jobs at the school board and took jobs at Chiang Mai International School in Thailand. And the international community, or the missionary community in Chiang Mai especially, Chiang Mai is a hub of missionaries where many mission organizations have their kind of home base, and then they springboard into closed countries like Cambodia or Laos or Vietnam or China that are not open to missionaries. So there's a big missionary community, and there was a big international church. And I met this guy at the church named David Eubank, and he went on to start this organization that I later worked for called the Free Burma Rangers. But at the time, he was just filling his backpack full of medicine and walking into the jungle in Burma and helping as many people as he could. And one day at church, he and I were just chatting. I was maybe 14 or 15 years old, and he said, "Hey, do you want to come with me to a refugee camp or to the border and to see these people that have fled from Burma?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay, that's you're 15, you want to have an adventure like these boys, they're like, oh, a dead body, let's go see the dead body."
Yeah.
And so I asked my mom, "Can I go to Burma?" And my mom, for some reason, said, "Yeah, go, see ya." And I remember going to this refugee camp. It was a full day's drive to get there, and off-roading through rivers and jungles and using the winch to pull the truck up, and real adventure stuff, the things that make you come alive. And then we ended up in this camp with all these IDPs and refugees. And I remember they took us to the edge of the camp. And as a 15-year-old boy from Canada, I had no context for war. I had no context for displacement, refugees, why people are in that situation. And they took me to the edge of the camp and showed me the trail into the jungle and said, "Oh, if the Burma army comes to burn down our camp tonight, this is the trail they'll come on." And I just remember thinking, wait, is that an option? Is that something that could potentially happen? And it was just this moment. And, for the next 2 days in this refugee camp, every dog that barked, I thought, "Oh, the Burma army is coming." But it was something that never left my mind. It was a memory that just stuck with me for the rest of my life. No matter where I went, college or into my other careers, it was just something that I remembered learning about. I remember growing up at that time and having to, and realizing that the world is a lot bigger and messier than what was, a small town in Canada.
Even for us, we don't have that experience of an actual experience of war and refugees and what that looks like, because all we see is what's on TV. Right. Or in movies or even on the news, but even the news is what, a 10-second, drone footage or, pan real quick. You don't get all the feels, the smells, the flavor. I mean, the air, to me, the air in Uganda, it tastes different. And my wife will tell you, she loves every time, the fruit and vegetables definitely taste different. She loves eating over there. But this, of getting out of the comfort zone. And that's what these boys in this movie did, right? There's these 4 12-year-olds. They're in a transition point going from basically elementary to junior high next year. And they get the opportunity to go on an adventure. And that's even what they sort of framed it at. They were going out and they were having a good time. But it was Gordy who was like, "I'm not sure this is a good time thing." He's like, "We're going to see a dead body." And even for him, he's dealing with the loss of his brother, Denny, who a couple months ago had died in a Jeep. So this movie is him processing his grief in many ways. But it's also Chris. He's transformed as well through this, because we see at the end, he's going to go take the smart kid courses, not just the shop courses.
Yeah. I love the fearlessness of youth. And, they're just willing to, like, oh, there's a dead body and we're going to have to hike and sleep out in the forest. And, Chris brings a handgun with him. And there's this free
loaded
sense of, and then he shoots it off. And when they go through the junkyard, they climb over and the junkyard has the dog, and they just aren't afraid. And there's something about that I just remember, like, as a kid, I thought, like, oh yeah, childhood is supposed to be this freeness to go and explore. But at the same time, you see the messiness of life in it. Like, and I think one of the beautiful things about the movie and what it shows about friendship, especially, is that they have, each of them kind of has these moments of weakness, these moments of vulnerability where, like, Teddy, for example, at the junkyard, he yells and screams at the junkyard owner and then starts crying, but he's got this weird relationship with his father, but he still loves his father somehow. And then, Gordy's got these moments, and Chris, they all have these moments where they kind of break down or they show these vulnerable parts to them while they're on this adventure of going to see a dead body.
Yeah. So I want to pull up this first clip. It's where they are in the junkyard, as you mentioned. They're there, but it's before the Cooper, I think is his name, or is Cooper the dog. Cooper's the dog. Or the junkyard owner and Cooper shows up. Sick balls, right?
Yeah.
And they're sitting around and just enjoying the moment. And so this is them sort of sitting, and you hear Gordy reflecting on sort of the power of that moment.
This is really a good time. The most.
A blast.
Vern didn't just mean being off limits inside the junkyard or fudging on our folks or going on a hike up the railroad tracks to Harlow. He meant those things, but it seems to me now it was more, and that we all knew it. Everything was there and around us. We knew exactly who we were and exactly where we were going. It was grand.
Great! Spit at the fat kid. Real good.
So again, going back to the framework of that closing line, I never had any friends later on like the ones I had when I was 12. How would you describe those friends in that? And we'll expand the focus a little bit from 12 to sort of going through that adolescent stage of what is it that makes us look back at that age. And I think for a lot of us, these older movies that we saw back when we were that age, what is it about those friends that creates that sense of longing and really a gap of we missed that experience?
What comes to my mind right away is about just this idea of shame. Like, when we're young, our relationship to shame maybe hasn't developed as fully. I work in Burma. I work with this ethnic group called the Karen people primarily. And they never seem to be embarrassed. Like, embarrassment and shame are like two things that just don't seem to be a part of their culture. And it's sometimes it's like a weird thing. Like, they do something that in the West we would just be like, oh, you're like, I don't really want to look because you're going to be embarrassed, or to save you from embarrassment. But they feel no embarrassment about things. And I think as we get older, we start to become more self-conscious about ourselves and the way we should act a certain way and do things. But when we're young and we have these friendships, we just see each other kind of more completely. And like the line that Gordy says in that clip you just played, he just says, we knew exactly who we were and exactly where we were going. And it almost brings tears to my eyes, because, like, man, when was the last time I felt like that? Like, when was the last time that I felt like I knew exactly who I was and exactly where I was going? And it's it's with these people that see us, where we can let our guards down. We don't have to worry about embarrassment and shame, and we can be ourselves and be fully ourselves as we tackle the topics that we're facing and the things that we're questioning. And like for Gordy, it's his grief and the loss of his brother. And, for Chris, he's dealing with like kind of a betrayal in his life and just where does he fit? But they get to deal with it with each other as in their community, in their friendship, because they don't have this relationship to shame that we develop.
Yeah, that's interesting. And they could be themselves. Like even, Vern, spit on the fat kid, because they're all spitting water in the can and then Teddy spits it in Vern's face. But that idea is like, he sort of knew he was who he was, right? He was kind of nerdy. Yeah. And it was interesting reading some of the Wikipedia stuff and back history of the movie, of how they the four boys went through this whole separate experience, and the camaraderie that you see on screen. They're like, it wasn't just on screen. Like, we were like real friends. Like that's who we were. And it was, as you said, reflected sort of who they were. Will Wheaton was thin and awkward and felt out of place. Corey Feldman was dealing with stuff with his parents, and the same thing with Jerry O'Connell. Like, you look at these, and obviously River Phoenix had his own demons, but you look at each one of those kids and they're being themselves, but they don't, even when they're getting emotional, you sort of see it at the end where they're calling themselves pussies because they're crying or because they're doing this. But what you see on the other end is, no, man, that's not how I see you at all.
Yeah. And I just think like, I don't act like that. I'm not open with my friend group in the way that I was when I was young. Like I just remember being young and having these friendships similar to these boys, where it was like, you can talk about anything and say anything. And everything felt important. Everything felt valued. And now as I'm older, it's like, okay, man, am I going to sound like a nut if I bring this up, or are they going to think I'm crazy if I have this struggle? And we start to self-censor, and there's a freedom that, the boys are out on this adventure and they are free. They get to make the decision. They get to plan the route. They get to, where are they going to sleep? What are they going to eat? How, like, there's this freedom to it for the first time in their lives. And they're also free to just be whoever they want and have whatever struggles they have.
Yeah. And I think we would say there's a certain innocence. And as we go through our lives, we do experience that. We call it the loss of innocence. We call it maturation. You can call it all sorts of things. And what you see, and they're going on a significant journey. It's hot. They end up not having food. And, it's back in, I'm not sure, probably supposed to be set in the 50s or 60s, but, where you can buy food for $2.37. And, they almost get run over by a train. They cross this swamp and get covered with leeches, and there's a sense that their fear is overwhelmed by their curiosity. And as we get older, I think the reverse happens and our fear dominates. If you had known what you were stepping into at 15 of going to this refugee camp that might get hit by the Burmese army, you're like, yeah, I might take a pass on that one.
I had no context for war, and I say that I think this movie is about Chris because now I'm in this process or this journey of discipleship and discipling young men, young women in Burma. But I see this balance that it has to be struck between, Chris is the tough guy. He stole the milk money. He's willing to fight. He's got the handgun. He's the tough kid. But in these moments of vulnerability and weakness, he's hurt by a betrayal, and he's hurt by this teacher, and he cries and he shows weakness, and he doesn't know what he should do in the future. And I see this parallel in these students that come to the Jungle Discipleship School. Like, okay, we wanted to mold them and teach them and to have these times of vulnerability and openness and softness, but we're getting bombed by the Burma army. Like, they're flying jets every day and they're shooting mortars and artillery. And so it's this weird context of how can we stay sensitive in our souls? How can we stay soft in our relationships with God, with each other, while living in the middle of a war zone? And I just see that in the story of Chris, and that he is like fighting these battles in his life, but there's something soft still inside of him and still innocent inside of him.
Yeah. And so you brought that scene up. And so I'll go ahead and play that one where Gordo wakes up. He'd had a dream because his brother Denny had died. And he had a dream where his father looked at him and he's like, it should have been you. Like, Denny was his father's favorite. He was a football player. He was a tough guy. Which, again, back in these days, those were the attributes that were recognized and rewarded. Gordo was awkward and weak and a good writer, but that wasn't a value. That wasn't a gift that was rewarded by his parents and in a lot of ways in society back then. So they're awake, and Gordo goes over to sit with Chris because they're watching guard because they hear coyotes or wolves or something yapping. And so they as happens, like you said, with the dogs barking, every dog barking you thought was the bird.
Yeah, true.
And so they're like, oh, maybe we should have a watch. So Gordo got up to sit with Chris, and Chris shared some of his story in this again, we have these moments that shift the current and shift the path of our lives. And so this thing that Chris was known for was stealing the milk money. Even his dad brought it up. Once a thief, always a thief. Like, he's known in the community. He's dismissed by the community. But there's more to the story, which I think is something that you and I believe very strongly in.
Maybe you could go into the college courses with me. That'll be the day. Why not? You're smart enough. They won't let me. What do you mean? It's the way that people think of my family in this town. It's the way they think of me. I'm just one of those low-life Chambers kids. That's not true. Oh, it is. No one even asked me if I took the milk money that time. I just got a 3-day vacation. Did you take it? Yeah, I took it. You knew I took it. Teddy knew I took it. Everyone knew I took it. Even Vern knew it, I think. Maybe I was sorry and I tried to give it back. You tried to give it back? Maybe. Just maybe. And maybe I took it to old lady Simons and told her, and the money was all there. But I still got a 3-day vacation because it never showed up. And maybe the next week, old lady Simons had this brand new skirt on when she came to school.
Yeah, it was brown and had dots on it.
Yeah. So let's just say that I stole the milk money, but old lady Simon stole it back from me. Just suppose that I told the story. Me, Chris Chambers, kid brother to Eyeball Chambers. Do you think that anyone would have believed it?
Oh.
And do you think that that bitch would have dared tried something like that if it'd been one of those douchebags from up on the View if they had taken the money?
No way. Hell no.
But with me? Well, I'm sure she had her eye on that skirt for a long time. Anyway, she saw her chance and she took it. I was the stupid one for even trying to give it back. Just never thought anyway. I just wish that I could go someplace where nobody knows me.
So you mentioned in our conversation leading up to this that you related to that story of betrayal by somebody who's sort of in a position to take care of you, protect. She was supposed to protect him, stand up for him, advocate for him as a teacher in the school. And he was betrayed. And, you know, it aligned with his deeper wounding of who he was and the way that people look at his family. So when you say you relate to that story, expand on that for me.
We just see that there's this, we talked about innocence, and now we see the loss of innocence. Like, there are these people that are supposed to be the ones that the adults, the adults are supposed to be adults, and they're supposed to all be trustworthy. And it turns out that they're not all trustworthy. And I just found this story here with Chris. Like, first of all, there's part of me that, he said, Gordy says, like, hey, did you steal the milk money? And he says, yeah, I stole it. Like, I stole it, and everybody knows I stole it. And there's part of me that actually likes him more because he actually did steal it. Like, he did see the opportunity and was like, felt like, oh, I'm going to go and do this. I'm following this urge to do this. But then he also felt bad about it and realized, like, hey, that's not who I want to be. My identity is not going to be the thief. I want it to be something different. So I'm going to go and give this money back. And I think that also takes courage to do that. Mm-hmm. And then this teacher, old lady Simons, betrays him, like goes out and buys herself a new dress, and he gets in trouble. Like, he gets his suspension. And I think it's just this time of realizing that, I don't know, for me, I just felt like there are these moments where we realize that our innocence is gone, or we can't trust the people. Like, we need to and for me, it was something like I had to start looking inside myself, because I wasn't sure, okay, who's going to betray me? Who can I trust, or who can I not trust? And then we turn our focus just inside, like, hey, I'm not going to put myself out there anymore. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to provide for myself. I'm going to protect myself. I'm going to take care of myself. And we see in Chris this struggle of his identity, where he says at the end, like, hey, I just want to go somewhere where no one knows my name. And I remember, because, I was a bit of a pain in the ass as a kid. And I ran away from home when I was a teenager, and I just for like a few days, more just because I was mad at my parents, and I dropped out of school, and I, again, not for very long, because I realized, like, hey, I did that thing, but then I didn't want to be that person. And so I can relate to Chris in that, but I remember just that I had this reputation of, that's that troublemaker. And even, as a kid in school, or as a kid in the youth group, I was known as kind of the bad kid in the youth group and the troublemaker. And a part of me liked that reputation and bought into that reputation, because it was like, hey, some of the girls, they think that's kind of cool. Like, oh, there's the bad kid. And, I'm not sure if I should actually spend time with him, but I want to. And I remember at times thinking things like, if I just go somewhere else. And I remember, I was maybe 14 when my family moved to Thailand. And I really remember having this thought, I can reinvent myself here. Nobody knows me here. Nobody knows anything about me. I can reinvent who I am here. And it's the same thing that Chris is saying. Like, he wants to go somewhere where he doesn't need to be the bully. He doesn't need to be the bad kid. he can start over, and he's really just wrestling with his identity and who he is and where he fits in these moments.
That's a statement that frames this age, is wrestling with your identity and having people with you as you wrestle with it. And there's power to that of, hey, who am I really? Like you see that early in the tracks when he's like, am I weird? And Chris, when Gordy says, am I weird? He's like, yeah, you're weird. We're all weird. And like, he's going back. Yeah, right. We have to embrace our weird. But
yeah,
you know, you see Gordy, he's like, no, I don't want to go to the college classes. I want to take shop class because that's where you are. And Chris said, well, you can't let your friends drag you down. Your friends should lift you up. Your friends, you know, he sees who he is. He speaks to who he could be, which is so helpful in that wrestling with identity, which, you know, we see that even more amplified in today's culture of who am I really? And you don't know. You know, even I remember my son when he went to college, and I asked him sort of what he was looking for out of it. And he said, well, I want to figure out who I am. It's like, that's a really good thing to search for. And then as father, I have to let him, it's almost like trying on clothes. It's like, I have to try on, is this who you want to be? Is that who you want to be?
Right.
And they have to figure it out on their own. And that's what they're doing on this journey is, who am I really? Or who do I want to become? You know, is the BGS stuff, the Morgan will say, is the most important things of who a man has become and who he is becoming. And we see that not just with these adolescent boys, but I think even as we grow in our faith, we wrestle with things that come up as you get faced with the word we used was trauma in our conversation, and not trauma like we experience in sort of a Western daily life, but actual trauma of large betrayals, of war, of sexual abuse, of physical abuse, of when you hear the stories of the people in these other countries, these third world countries, you see trauma in a way that causes you to even wonder, as we wrestle with our own identity and who we are in Christ, of who God is, as we deal with these horrific situations that you see, like you almost have to grow up spiritually. Is that tracking?
Yeah.
Is that making?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there and a lot to it, but you know, I spent the last 9 years working with this organization that, you know, this guy who took me into the jungle when I was 15, I went back 10 years ago and said, hey, can I volunteer for 6 months? And that turned into the last decade. And this year I left from that organization. And one of the things that I said in leaving the organization was, hey, I don't want this to be a divorce. I want this to feel like your kid has grown up and now is leaving home. And I want it to feel like, hey, you're sending your kid out into the world and they're going to have some success on their own. They're going to have some failures on their own. They're going to make some mistakes on their own, but they're still part of the family, but they've got to go and do it. They've got to go and try it. And there's a lot of fear in leaving this organization that I'd worked for the last decade and going on my own. And I just remember, you know, one of the mottos that we try to live by over in Burma is don't be led by comfort or fear. And we have these things that guide or lead us in our decision making. And often it's comfort or not wanting to be uncomfortable, or it's fear. And hey, I'm afraid to do this. And when I thought about leaving this organization and going on my own in Burma, there was a lot of fear and a lot of comfort. There's just comfort in staying in the normal thing. And then to take it to this idea of trauma, like we see, I don't like, I don't want you. I remember listening to your series on Band of Brothers, and a series that I love, the Band of Brothers series, a lot, but it's not easy for me to watch. And nowadays, I just find myself having a hard time watching these war movies because I'm just like, man, I get enough of it in my life, and movies like Saving Private Ryan or the Band of Brothers series, where they're very graphic and very realistic in their portrayal of war. I don't like to look at people who've had their legs blown off or people whose bodies are mangled from shrapnel. And because once you look and you see it, it's stuck in your brain, and it's there. It's kind of burned into your memory, and there has to be a place and a way to handle it. And for me, it was a matter of just circling up with some of my team at the end of the day and just asking the question, hey, was there anything today that felt overwhelming, or where you felt you were out of control, or it was out of your control? Because these are kind of the indicators of trauma, is you're in a situation and you have no agency, you have no control anymore over the situation. For example, I get mortars shot at me. I can't control where the mortar is going to land. And you have this panic. And then it's a fairly overwhelming experience. And how we respond to this is by just admitting, hey, I felt overwhelmed in this. I felt like I didn't have any control in this moment. And by having a circle of people that you can come to and be open and honest, and even just say like, hey, I felt I was afraid. And that's not easy to say in a war zone where you're supposed to be a tough guy. But,
right.
We don't want to be led by comfort or fear over there. And I think here in North America as well. But it's just a hard thing to deal with, but you can't deal with it on your own. And I remember there's a great book by Sebastian Junger called Tribe. And he talks about these veterans come back from the war to North America, and they go and live in an apartment on their own. And they only have social interactions through social media. And they don't have a community, that a tribal society. He was kind of comparing, like, why do vets now get PTSD and the tribal warriors of the past didn't? PTSD was never a thing. And he relates it to the idea of community, that we have these people, this circle of the few in our lives that we can go to and say, hey, man, I can't get these images out of my mind, or I'm not sleeping well. I keep waking up in the night, and to talk it through. And we live in this very individualistic culture nowadays, very independent living. And that causes a lot of mental stress and a lot of mental anguish after the trauma has taken place.
Yeah, I remember reading something about that, how even in like World War II, after all that stuff that they saw over there in Europe, the veterans, it was actually probably the sort of the PTSD preventer. I'm not saying that it prevented it, but maybe helped with the buff, was the fact they had to, you were in a boat for a couple weeks coming across the Atlantic.
Yeah.
Again, in the situation, you're forced community. Whereas now, like you said, we have 2-3 days ago, you were in Thailand or Burma, and now you're in Colorado.
Yeah.
That, John Eldredge says, bodies move faster than our souls can do, right? And you're like, I need to wait for my soul to catch up with me.
Another classic movie, Peter Rabbit. But in this Peter Rabbit movie, Peter Rabbit, he says something like, oh, my body has traveled fast, but my heart is yet to arrive. And man, it feels like that sometimes. Like, and especially like I've just transitioned from the jungle to Thailand to North America. And we get on a plane, and you can change instantly your location, your culture, everything. And for me, it's just like, whoa, my heart is still somewhere deep in the jungle of Burma. And now I'm trying to navigate North American culture that seems to just get crazier every time I come back. And so it's like, okay, I need some time. I need to be gracious to myself, but I need to also have people to walk with me in that journey.
Yeah. So as we turn towards home, we look at it again, the line of, I never had any friends like I did back then. Does anyone? And so me, the question becomes, this could be a whole podcast on itself, a whole conversation just alone here, but how do we find that? How do we get that in our culture, in our setup? I would imagine it's part of it starts with a self-invitation of saying, hey, can I come over? Can we get coffee? I remember one of my buddies, it started of, can we get coffee like once a week? Cause I really want, like you and I, like you said, that idea of the like-hearted kings, we're like-hearted, pursuing the same thing. Let's get together and just hang out and have coffee. And I think that's one way that I think it helps, going back to the stealing from our earlier conversation of self-invitation. But what are some ways that you can develop a tribe, and what does it take?
Well, if I knew, I wouldn't be in counseling. Isn't that the $1 million question? But I love coffee. I love going for coffee, and just sitting with somebody and having a heart to heart over a coffee is one of my favorite things. But I also heard, I don't know where I heard this, a number of years ago, a Christian speaker somewhere just said, hey guys, stop going for coffee with each other. And what he meant by that was go and do something together.
Yeah.
Like go hiking, go and build something, get a project where your hands, your body, your whole being is active, and do something. And I think the fires, BGS has the fires, and I think it's good. Like, you sit around the fire together, you build the fire together, there's an engagement that is a more physical thing. And go camping, go biking, go do something. And I always just remember that, because my default is, hey, let's go meet at Starbucks, let's go meet at Tim Hortons, or whatever the Thai equivalent of that is, and have a coffee. But I just think there's something to doing something together. And if Morgan and the guys, they started making beer. What was it called? The Sons of Thunder Brewing Company. But so for me, it's just like, find something to do together. And the second part of it, I think it just takes vulnerability. And I'm not good at vulnerability, and it's not something that comes easy to me. But when somebody else is willing to be vulnerable in the right context, it helps engage me to be vulnerable. And I just say that in the sense of, like, in this context of these 4 boys growing up on this adventure, they all see each other in their weirdness. They all see each other in who they really are, as the fat kid, the nerdy kid, the kid who wants to be a soldier, and the bully. They all see each other for who they really are and accept it. They fully accept who they are and who each other is. And it takes some vulnerability. It takes some courage to be open with each other in that. And, we can have these shallow men's groups, which I think we're all sick of. These Bible studies that we don't need another Bible study. We don't need another kind of shallow time where we say things like, oh, this verse really spoke to me because of this. But we need a real group of just a few people that we can be real and really exposed in ourselves to.
Yeah. No, that's really good. The last couple of times I visited my brother, he lives out in Texas, and he will have a project. Like one time we built a router table. That was my birthday present. Because he knew I didn't have one. And so he's like, I got these plans for a DIY router table, and we're going to build it together. And
cool.
I can't remember what we did last time. But we end up out in the barn one year around Christmas, I helped build a tree. Wasn't a tree house because it wasn't in a tree, but it was like a clubhouse for his kids.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
like we a day doing that, I'm like, that's an awesome thing because every time the kids are in there, that was something that Uncle Paul helped build. I was a part of that, even though I'm several states away and we don't see each other that often, but I've still done something that has helped them. I had, like you mentioned, my buddies who come over on Tuesday night, a bunch of them came and helped me with my deck, replacing some of the boards. And there is something to it about getting out, doing stuff together, hiking, camping, build something, do a project where it's not just sort of sitting around navel gazing or sort of I had somebody talking to me about the men's pancake breakfast down in the church basement. It's like, it's basically a sermon with pancakes. And he's like, you don't actually know this guy's sleeping in a different room than his wife. This guy's struggling with porn. This guy's dealing with anger stuff. Because you're just sitting there listening to some dude they brought in give another sermon. He's like, no, you got to get out and get into life so that you do develop that feeling of, I can be myself. I can be my weird, and I'm not worried about it. And you sort of regain some of that innocence because you can be who you want to be. You can be who you are without worrying about sort of how that's going to come across with those people.
Yeah. And it sounds weird to say, but like, I'm so thankful that God has called me to work in a war zone. And I'm so thankful, like Morgan has this line, like that my life requires prayer, that if God doesn't show up, I'm hooped. And a lot of times if God doesn't show up, I'm dead. And I'm so thankful for that because, first of all, I get to see God and experience God in this new way. But I also, when you get shot at with somebody, you have a bond like together with this person. And when you're there and you're actually physically trying to help rescue somebody from a war zone, I have these incredible bonds with my team in Burma. And there are these things that we've experienced together that go beyond words, and that, we've dodged death together, and that unites people. And it's a little deeper than just going to Starbucks for coffee.
Yeah. So, if you feel led, come visit Dave out in Thailand and head to Burma in the jungle. If you really want to experience it. I did give Dave the out before we started recording. I was like, hey man, if you sort of say something that's going to get you in trouble overseas, just let me know. I'll cut it out. And he was so funny. He's like, yeah, I'm kind of a loose cannon with that. I trust God to protect me. Just like, yeah, I'll blurt out anything. Yeah. So Dave, if going to Burma isn't their cup of tea, what are some ways that people could partner with you, find out what you're doing, and, in a lot of ways come alongside you and participate in your mission?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. If somebody wants to come to Burma, get in touch and we'll find a way. If God's calling you to, have an adventure or come to the Jungle Discipleship School, which is the school that I run. By all means, we need great young men and women and couples to come and help shine the light of Jesus in the war zone. Mm-hmm. So, but if that's not your cup of tea, we have a website, junglediscipleshipschool.com, and we're on Facebook. And we also started a podcast and a little TV show. And I'll just caveat that by saying we are by no means good filmmakers or TV. Like, we have no idea what we're doing. And, but we started these things because we wanted to document and tell the story of the Jungle Discipleship School and what it's like to start a school in the war zone. And so we have on our Facebook page has all the videos and our website, but we put out a podcast as well. And part of the podcast is the students sharing the news about what is happening in Burma, because really it's, on the news, we hear about the Ukraine and we hear about Israel, but you don't hear about Burma. They've been at war for 75 years. And Right now, the war is bloodier than at any other time in the history of Burma. And it's a really dangerous and deadly situation that is not getting any coverage on the news. And so one of the things we do on the podcast, I talk a lot about discipleship and do some interviews and different things. But one of the segments we have on the podcast is that the students come on and they share a little of the news about what's happening from their ethnic perspective and their ethnic area of Burma. And just, it's about a 10-minute segment of the students. And, their English is not great. And so you have to kind of bear with it a little bit. But it's there's a lot on the junglediscipleshipschool.com website or our Facebook page with the same name. And the Jungle Discipleship School is our 10-month discipleship school inside Burma.
Yeah. So really appreciate you taking the time while you're back here in the States to come on and have this conversation. If you, like I said, we talk about the few, the few would be the ones who feel called to Burma. If you do, great. I'm sure there's going to be places on the website that you can contact Dave. If you feel like partnering financially, do that, because that's another, there's never enough money to do all the things that you'd love to do. But if you do nothing else, I'd ask you guys to pray for Dave, pray for protection, pray for guidance as he deals with he's in a war zone. So pray for protection, pray for God's word to move in those dark spaces. And we know that his light is stronger than any darkness. And so those other ones are sort of if you can ask, but if you're listening to this, say a prayer for Dave right now and his jungle discipleship school and the country of Burma as a whole, that peace would come and that God's light, the gospel, the good news of the gospel would come and change not just a person, not just communities, but the whole country and, eventually the world, right?
Yeah. 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 And prayer is really the big thing, like I've got students that are former soldiers that are now coming to the discipleship school. And there's, for example, one student, he's killed 11 Burma Army soldiers and half of them he's killed with a knife. And so like when you're in a combat situation and you're having to kill someone with a knife, like this, I don't care who you are, this is going to do something to your heart, to your brain. And my experience is Jesus is the one that heals. Jesus is the only way for these people to really get freedom. And it comes through praying. And so our students need a ton of prayer. And Satan is totally against the Jungle Discipleship School. There's a lot of physical warfare. There's a lot of spiritual warfare. And so I'm thankful, Paul, for the prayer that you said before we started recording and just for the call, the shout out to get more prayer, because we can never have enough prayer.
Well, thanks, David. And I think with any of these missions that we go on, when we engage in the deeper mission, the big mission, the stuff that God's called us to, we actually have an experience similar to the boys when they come back and they say the town, it just looks a little different. And so as I close, I want to play that a reminder of we're not called to be comfortable. We're not called to be safe. We're not called to live with an absence of fear and comfort, but we're we're called to carry the cross. We're called to make a mission and make a mark. And when we do that, we do find out who we are. And we do find out that, as you said, when you not just share bullets, share gunfire, but when you're under fire with someone, whether that's physically or spiritually, you get to know them. And that's how you develop these bonds of friendship and brotherhood that extend all over the world. So thank you, Dave, not just for coming on, but for what you're doing, for chasing, for going towards the fear and the discomfort, and for taking the gospel. So this has been Paul McDonald and Dave Small talking about Stand By Me. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
We headed home, and although many thoughts raced through our minds, we barely spoke. We walked through the night and made it back to Castle Rock a little past 5 o'clock on Sunday morning, the day before Labor Day. We'd only been gone 2 days, but somehow the town seemed different, smaller.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?